everyone, and welcome back to a special series of Launchpod episodes where we're checking in on some of our past guests to find out how they're doing and see if they can impart some wisdom by way of tools, resources, or insights, or to see if there's anything they need help with during these challenging times. So listen in and see if you can grab some advice on how to stabilize your own startup or to find out if you can help in some way. First up, we're chatting with Mike Chang, Next alum and CEO and co-founder of Lumen5, the #1 video creator for content marketing. Early this month, Mike shared his insights with our listeners about bootstrapping a startup. I'm guessing that those insights are even more relevant in today's environment, so make sure you go back and have a listen. Today, Mike's sharing some really interesting ideas for how to maintain your culture in a work-from-home environment. It turns out that water cooler chatter doesn't have to be a thing of the past. Thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. First, just off, after a massive thank you for joining us, because I'm sure you have a lot on your plate, as do most entrepreneurs out there. I just wanted to do a quick check and say, I imagine life, no matter whether you have an optimistic outlook or things have been hard the last couple of weeks, like life probably looks different, right? So if you look at just the last 3 weeks for you personally and professionally, can you kind of give us a sense of what you've been dealing with, both personally and as it kind of relates to your team at Lumen5?
Yeah, so leading up to it, I would say leading up to the official everybody work from home mandates, that was definitely a time of tension and questions. I think the atmosphere leading up to it was a bit tense because different people had different living conditions. Different people may live with elderly parents, they may have existing conditions themselves. And so I think people were responding to the coronavirus situation at different pace, and there were certainly team members that were really tuned into the situation all the way back in January, whereas other team members were not quite, fully grasping their minds around the scale of the pandemic, even up until closer to the beginning of March. So I think that time was actually a bit more challenging, which is getting everybody on the same page. I think without the clear government directive at that time, there was a lot of questions as to what kind of responsibilities we have as business leaders to make that call prior to Trudeau making that call. So I think that time was actually a lot more tricky. Then once it became a bit more clear, once our kind of government bodies and leaders came forth and stated clearly what the situation is, then it was all execution. It was all, okay, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it. And then we went full remote, like many companies across the globe right now, and now currently trying to transform our daily workflow into a virtual setting.
For sure. And so it's so interesting, because you talk about that tricky time and, I can totally relate as a member of a leadership team and, knowing that there were so many questions and so much uncertainty. Was there something that worked well for you as a leader, like during that really tricky time to kind of help your team through it?
I think it's opening up those conversations. It's not often things that people feel comfortable voicing. I think even now, there's a certain discomfort to over preparation. There's a bit of a fear of coming across as too paranoid or just a little too fearful in a socially unacceptable way. So what worked really well was really just opening up those conversations and asking for those opinions as opposed to waiting for those opinions to come forth. And when you probe into it and really explicitly ask people in a group setting or in a team setting, how do you feel about what's happening in Wuhan currently, you can start to tease out how different people think and feel about the situation. And I think getting on the same page, the first step of getting onto the same page is bringing out these different points of opinions and then seeing where the team stands. So that's certainly what we did in the earlier kind of first 3 months of this year. So by the time things got really bad, we at least have had all of those conversations in advance. And then by that time, it was just about making that decision.
Right. How big is your team?
We're currently at 33 people.
Okay. So sizable. Yeah, it clearly sounds like you have good EQ and empathy as a leader, right? Because kind of teasing out or getting just like the sense that there is something wrong from your employees doesn't come naturally to everybody.
Yeah, it's there's definitely lots of different angles to it. Partially, that is what I strive towards as a leader, is understanding that at the end of the day, a company is just a group of people, and how people think and feel have an absolute correlation to the performance of the people and therefore the business. So that's something that I'm really tuned into. Another thing that I think I had a bit of an advantage on is I come from a family from Hong Kong, and we've seen the SARS epidemic. Family-wise, on a personal basis, I've been following the situation since early January. So I think there was just a lot more availability of information through the experiences of my family and my extended family as well.
Right.
So
And
that also helped. Yeah.
how is your family doing?
It's kind of interesting. People in Hong Kong are somewhat like business as usual because this is just SARS again. A lot of it is the best practices, the washing your hands, and all those preemptive measures were well ingrained into the culture. So I don't think it came as much of a shock as it did to perhaps cultures that haven't experienced an epidemic or a pandemic in recent memory.
Right. Very true. And, speaking of culture, and going back to your team for a second, were you accustomed to a work from home or kind of a remote environment, or was that also quite a bit of a shift?
I think it was quite a bit of a shift. Now, people do work remotes. It's totally common for people to spend a day or two a week working remotes from home to focus. But I think previously, the distinction was very much so that you would collaborate in the office and you would split off to do remote work if you need to focus as an individual contributor. So it's not that remote was foreign, but remote collaboration was something that's very new to us. And that's a new muscle that we've had to build over the past 2 weeks.
Right. And what's working for you guys right now in terms of collaborating in a virtual environment?
So this has actually been a fascinating topic for me. Building digital communities is something that I've always been really passionate about. Going through school, my career goal was to become a video game designer. Obviously, didn't end up pursuing that path, but this has created a bit of an opportunity for me to flex those muscles. So the first thing I really dug into immediately going into social distancing was, how do I build digital communities, digital spaces, virtual spaces was really important for me. And in the first weekend, I did pretty deep research into a number of software solutions for creating a virtual space. And how I kind of describe a virtual space is things like Slack and Zoom are not virtual spaces. They are technologies that allow you to connect kind of through communication bases, but it doesn't have that physical presence. So ultimately, we arrived on choosing a software platform called Sococo, which gives you a virtual office layout. It's a bird's eye view with desks and tables. And I set up a number of lounges and meeting rooms so that when people meet, they have to physically, in their virtual office space, travel into a meeting room together and then turn on their webcams and chat. But part of that consideration was the establishment of the lounges. So I'm looking at kind of my virtual office right now. We have a virtual town hall. There's a virtual party room. There's virtual couches. And that was, in my view, one of the most critical things. And in retrospect, getting feedback as well, the team currently can't really imagine doing this remote work without a virtual office, because that's where we're getting the social interactions. Water cooler conversations continue to happen because there's literally a virtual water cooler. And people gather around and chat about what life is like in the new normal. So I think those things
And
were
can
critical to
anybody
helping us.
listen in on that water cooler chatter? How does that work?
Yes, so you can move around in the virtual office, and as long as you're within proximity, you can participate in that conversation. So if I see 3 people hanging out on the couches, I can hop in and I can immediately listen in on those casual conversations. If I'm in a virtual meeting room, I have the option to close the door to signal that this is a private meeting, or I can open the door and welcome anyone to pass by. So those are what I consider to be virtual communities. It's a digital space that allows the team to continue to interact in a way that they have traditionally in a physical sense, and mapping that into a remote lifestyle.
Right.
Whereas sticking with something strictly like Slack or Zoom doesn't allow you to naturally create those water cooler conversations or lunchtime conversations.
I love that. And so do you feel like this solution that you've identified allows you to kind of bring some of that empathy as a leader to this virtual world? Because, the scenario you were describing earlier around when things got really tricky, like I can totally relate to that environment and picking up on people's body language and just the tone of their voice. So do you feel like you're still able to have that empathy and EQ for your team based off of this solution that you've put in place?
Yeah, and I think the key is to create opportunities for people to express the equivalence of body language in a digital space, which can be tricky. But for example, in Sococo, we established a number of somewhat of a social norms and operating rules from the get-go, which is if you're sitting at a couch, you're signaling that you are open to conversation. And if you're seated at a desk, you're signaling that you want to focus right now. So it's a digital version of a body language that allows people to express in a very subtle way, hey, I'm working, but I do want to chat. And so I'm working on a digital couch. And those things have really helped. So even as I'm staring at the digital office that I have in front of me, I can see that there's 3 people who are working on couches right now, which tells me a lot about how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how they want to spend their day today. And I can see a few people who are kind of chatting within the virtual meeting rooms with the door closed. And I know they're in focus time, they're productive.
Mm-hmm.
And at a
Wow, that's
glance,
like so cool. I really
yeah.
want to look into this for our team. I so miss those impromptu chats. And
Mhm.
we're using kind of Zoom, Google Hangouts, Slack, and I feel like we're definitely missing the more kind of natural or organic, like impromptu chats.
Yeah, yeah. It also kind of allows us to simulate the experience of just taking off your headphones and talking to the person next to you. Our
Mhm.
teams are seated in separate clusters and they have their audio on. They don't necessarily have to have their microphone on, but their audio is on, which means anyone at any time can say, hey, can I get some help? And anyone that's seated next to them will be able to hear that call for help. And that's how organic conversations can continue to happen in a way that would be tricky when you have just a Slack and Zoom combo. You're not getting those cues where people are open to conversation, casual chats, but you might not know that they are.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like you've got some good solutions, and obviously you continue to be a great leader, amidst all of this uncertainty and change. What about though, like from a business perspective, have there been challenges, just in terms of your customers, their mindset? Have you had any changes from looking at kind of your current customer base? Has behavior changed, and have there been new challenges? And then looking at more your acquisition channels, like where are those new pain points, and what are you guys doing to tackle those?
Yeah, so we at Lumen 5 as a video creation platform are fundamentally a communication tool. And so the benefit we have is during times of crisis, people still need to communicate in some ways, perhaps more so than ever before. Many of our customers rely on Lumen 5 to produce marketing videos to then post on social media to build their brand. And with key marketing channels like events being canceled around the world, brands are looking more to social media than ever before. So we're seeing record usage even in people creating COVID related videos, but also general brand videos as well. But at the same time, it's not like we're seeing exponential growth in ways that perhaps Slack and Zoom are, because we're also offset by a lot of our smaller end customers who are struggling with their businesses, who are less likely to invest in a new software solution at this time. Some of the changes that we've seen in customer behaviors are that the buying motivations are different in this climate. Prior to the pandemic, people buy to win, to grow, to hit their business goals, whereas now I think people are playing a bit more on the defensive. People are buying software for the sake of saving costs, saving money. And from that angle, we've had to pivot our selling methodology a little bit from the perspective of it's not so much about creating videos to win market share, but more so how can we as an AI and machine learning solution to video production allow you to save costs. Perhaps there are companies that are spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars hiring outsourced video production firm to produce content. Lumen 5 is then a great opportunity for them to cut costs and produce videos at a significantly lower rates. So those are some of the changes that are happening on the business side.
Right. And so from a selling methodology perspective, have the channels changed through which you're acquiring new customers, or is it really just kind of your positioning and tone that's changed?
I would say from a channel perspective, so take for example something like Facebook and Google Ads, we definitely have to shift our geographical targeting as we're starting to see the pandemic hits different regions of the world in very different ways. And that's reflected in the conversion rates on our paid advertising as well. So it's very clear and easy to see that if you're running ads in countries that are hit really hard, the conversion rates are just not going to be there. So we've had to pivot the geographical targeting, and that has yielded some good results.
Right. And would you say, I mean, content marketing, like, listen, as a CMO, I can tell you it's very top of mind for me. And it's something that we've really been struggling with. I think over the last couple of weeks, I think we've landed in a good place. Our product is very different because we're selling this promise of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurs are the ones who will be the lifeblood of our economy when we come out on the other side. But for you as an organization, you do have expertise in that domain as well. Like, is this almost opening up new opportunities for you to add value to, say, some of those smaller customers, who might be really struggling with keeping their costs really low, or just struggling with, what do I say right now? How do I say it? You talked about COVID videos versus brand
Yeah.
videos, right? And like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if there's an additional opportunity there, or if you're already doing something to help those smaller customers in this time.
Yeah, so I think the fact that our technology exists is something that um, is can be quite transformative for some types of companies, especially business owners who don't have the resources to hire a content team or a video team at that. Lumen 5 has somewhat made it really easy for anyone without video editing experience to easily create video content. So in that sense, what we've been able to do is allow business owners and marketing teams to be able to create videos with the ideas that they have without having to rely on some third party. As you can imagine, not many companies have an in-house video production team, and most businesses are not really keen on going out there to hire a video production team right now. So having a technology solution makes it much easier for businesses to be able to produce content. There's not too much that we do in terms of guiding people in terms of what types of content they should create, because I think that is so varied from industry to industry. A realtor is creating videos in a very different way than an organization like Next. But what we do specialize in is really just providing those technology solutions to be able to empower people to tell the stories that they already are very familiar with. Like, you are very familiar with the next story that you need to tell. Whereas, someone working in cybersecurity would be very well versed in the cybersecurity stories, customer narratives that they want to communicate. And what our technology does is really bridges the gap so that they can tell those stories in a video format without having to spend thousands of dollars to do it. And that's the primary way in which we're helping right now.
No, I think that's like exactly the way that companies should be thinking about it. I think right now we are in a COVID-19 frenzy. And I think we were chatting right before we got on this call that it could be easy to lose sight of your North Star as an organization, especially if demand for that North Star has really tapered off. But, at least from our perspective, again, recognizing we're in a unique position, staying true to our mission and looking to new ways to keep our costs low and keep everything in house. We've used Lumen 5 before. It's a great tool. And I think continuing to find ways to do the work in-house and remain true to your mission is something that I think most brands should be doing. Again, I think again, you are, I don't want to use the word fortunate, because I know you're very strategic in terms of the business that you've built. So I don't think that it's just this very lucky, experience that your business is continuing to be okay, and potentially, I don't even know. Can I use the word thrive? Like, what would you say just in terms of your outlook for your business for the next 6 months?
I think it's in some ways it's business as usual in the startup world, in the sense that every startup is always almost live or die from quarter to quarter.
Mm-hmm.
I think were it not for a physical manifestation of a major shift in the world, there are market changes that are threatening the livelihood of startup entrepreneurs all the time. So I wouldn't say we're thriving, but I also don't think that the pandemic is a unique situation. It's just one form of how a startup could be threatened. And I think fortune plays a huge angle in the world of business, in my view, is we're lucky in that this specific pandemic doesn't hit our business as much as it has hit other businesses in a very
Mhm.
unfortunate way. But fortunately, I guess as startup entrepreneurs, this is somewhat the life that we signed up for. And of all the 33 people we've hired, they've also signed up for somewhat of a roller coaster ride where you're not sure if the company will be around 1 or 2 years from now, as opposed to joining a big company like Oracle. So I do feel good in knowing that in some ways, everyone who joins a startup is ready to really not know what's going to happen the next day.
Yeah, it's so true. You're certainly not the first entrepreneur or founder we've spoken to in the last 2 weeks who has said that. Just the importance of mindset, and framing of the problem and the opportunities at hand. Um, if again, I know you've spoken publicly around other ways that entrepreneurs can um, creatively drive growth for their organizations, or think about things like revenue generating or fundraising creatively. Just to end, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to share with any other startups or entrepreneurs who might be falling on hard times, and opportunities for them to just get creative or keep growth top of mind. I realize that's a totally vague net to
Mhm.
cast because every business is so different. But if there is anything that you can share by way of advice or resources, I'm sure people would be hungry for that right now.
Yeah, I think the first step I would recommend is do a little bit of research on the sheer volume of companies, multi-billion dollar companies that have been built either on no funding or minimal funding. And I think, in exploring funding alternatives, you have to first believe that it's possible to build a non-VC backed company. And I think that's where it starts. There's lots of companies like even Shopify, who didn't raise capital until significantly later on in their life cycle with lots of revenue, or companies like Shutterstock or MailChimp, have Plenty of Fish here in Vancouver, also a $500 million company that was built almost completely bootstrapped, or again, fundraised at a very late stage. Atlassian comes to mind. And there's just long lists of companies that have either raised no capital or very little capital, or they raised very late where they were already generating a lot of revenue. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there's lots of successful case studies out there, and that if you're having trouble raising VC money right now, it's not the end of the world. And kind of taking that step back, especially for aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking to get started and feel like they don't have the funding. I think in the early stages, it has everything to do with your personal skill sets and the combination of skill sets that you and your co-founders bring to the table. I think a lot of the early stage fundraising is to pay for skills that you don't have on the co-founding team. And so the more diverse skills you have on the co-founding team, the less money you have to raise in the early stages. And that's something that I would certainly challenge people to think about is it the right co-founding team to work on the right idea? So if you've got 3 non-technical co-founders and you are really passionate about a highly technical idea, it's going to require a lot of funding, because none of the co-founding team members have the skills to execute on the idea that you want to pursue. Whereas if the idea you want to pursue is very well aligned with the skill sets that you have, you should be able to get a lot done without having to raise any capital, without having to kind of bring on additional team members or expand the team. And then the second point that I always turn to is, in my view, focus makes the difference between a winning company and a losing company. It's your ability to focus on one thing at a time and double down on your strengths, do 1 or 2 things really well, as opposed to try and tackle 10 or 20 things. So in that sense, having less capital is not a bad thing. It forces you to focus, and it forces you to pick from the 10 ideas that you have, what is the one thing you're going to do and how are you going to do it well? Because in a bootstrap scenario, you only have enough resources to pursue 1 or 2 of those things. You don't have the luxury of indecision, which I think can often happen if you have a lot of resources. You have the luxury of indecision and just trying everything. So I think those are some mindsets and framing in terms of how you can approach a business in a climate where funding isn't readily available.
For sure. And I think that those principles would stand for any situation, right? Like the importance of a strong team, and having focus, right? I think that that's served you well up until this point, and it kind of helped you be very ready for these new circumstances. I know that I said that was my last question. Just very quickly, are you hiring right now at all? Are you guys looking for talent?
Yeah, we currently have plans in 2020 to hire about 25 people. This quarter, we have about 4 to 5 open positions right now, and we're definitely trying to hire during a time when not many people are hiring, and that gives us some unique access to a talent pool that may normally be very competitive.
Okay, amazing. I love that. And we'll make sure to share those job postings with our network, because I know there's a lot of very talented people out there looking for work, right?
Sure, yeah, all of our postings are always up at lumenfab.com/careers. We always keep that up to date.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been fantastic. And we'll make sure to share basically all the resources you've talked about across our channels. And yeah, I'm wishing you and the team a lot of luck. And I'm sure we will be chatting soon.
Great, you as well. Thank you so much.
Next up, I'm reconnecting with Jaclyn Ling, Next 36 alum and co-founder at Hatchways. They help new grads, self-taught programmers, and career shifters get their first job as software engineers. We recorded an episode of LaunchPod with Jaclyn and her co-founder Shams a few weeks ago. We'll air that episode soon, but for now, so much has changed in 3 short weeks, so we wanted to check in and see how recent events have impacted Hatchways. With such a strong founding team, it's no surprise that they've been able to adapt and find new ways to add value for Canadian talent. Hey, Jaclyn, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Hanging in there, as I'm sure you are. So yeah, huge thank you for joining us. For those who are listening in, we actually recorded a really great episode with Jaclyn and her co-founder Shams at Hatchways. We actually went and visited them in their co-working space in downtown Toronto, and we did a really wonderful recording, which we will be releasing very soon. It's a lot about kind of your co-founder journey and just the success that Hatchways has seen. So we can't wait to release that. But, it's really wild to reflect on how much has changed, because I can't remember when that was, but it was like 3 weeks ago, maybe. And, you look at just how much has changed. The fact that we came to record in your office and it was bustling, and it was this bustling co-working space, and I went to the Eaton Center afterwards to run an errand, and now here we are, chatting to each other probably from our living rooms or bedrooms. And I just wanted to check in and say, like, what's been going on at Hatchways and for you and Shams over, call it, the last couple of weeks, which now feels like a lifetime. If you can give people just a sense for what you've been dealing with, both personally and professionally, we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty crazy to think about. I think of 3 weeks ago when you guys came in to do the filming was kind of the last week that we were all in the office together, actually. And so I think the day after you guys came in, we started to do a work from home policy. And so we haven't been working day to day with each other for since then, actually.
Sorry, like literally like the day after?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's so wild.
That's so wild. And you're right. It just feels like so long ago, but to like realize it was only 3 weeks ago is crazy. I mean, I think in the beginning of when this was going on, it was a lot more uncertain, a lot more stressful, a lot more unanswered questions. And so I think in the beginning of this crisis, there was a lot of uneasiness from everybody. I think this week is sort of the week in which things have settled down a little bit more, at least from like a mental perspective, and also from more of a planning and strategy perspective, because we were able to kind of take some time to think back and figure out what strategic decisions do we need to make during this time. And so I think that that's kind of the thing that we were focused on over the last few weeks. I think our team generally has adapted pretty well to working in a remote environment. Almost everything we do is online anyways, and so it hasn't affected our workflow too much.
Right. And you're a team of 4, you said?
We're a team of 5.
5, okay.
So actually that's a big thing that, we were kind of like navigating through in the last few weeks. We were actively hiring for the last couple months. And we actually decided, like we were still going to continue with the hire that we were going to make. And so actually had somebody start this week, which is big kind of, we've never kind of onboarded somebody remotely online and to
That's
not,
so,
whether or not,
that's so interesting. Like, what does that look like, a virtual onboarding? Like, how different was that for you versus having them in the space with you?
I think the biggest difference is just like the feeling of like connection, which is tough to build online, especially because we were running all the interviews online as well. And so to know that you hired somebody that you've actually never met in person is also kind of weird. But it's actually been not bad so far. We obviously try to do as many like kind of social things online to get to know the person that we recently hired better, and to allow that person to feel like we are building a connection, even though it's kind of online.
Awesome. And so, obviously amidst all those changes, it's fantastic news that you were able to still hire and onboard someone. And because you're a relatively small, nimble team, it sounds like moving to a work from home model was also fairly seamless. But, you alluded to some strategic decisions that you had to make pretty quickly. Would you be able to elaborate on those a bit more in terms of, have you had to make actual changes to your product or your positioning over the last week? And if so, what did that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, our business is a two-sided marketplace. And on one side, it's startups that hire technical talent. And on the other end, it's software developers that are newer to the industry looking to get their foot in the door. And given, the crisis, we're seeing a dramatic like slowdown in hiring, a lot of hiring freezes, a lot of layoffs, a lot of just like in the middle of interviews and then just like kind of cutting them all off. And so we saw that a lot over the last 3 weeks. And so from that end, we had to, rethink that business from like an employer engagement standpoint. But on the other end, we saw such a increase in demand from a candidate perspective, because now there are a lot of people who are either in school or about to graduate, and their schools have now turned remotely online, or their exams are canceled, or their internships are canceled, and people are looking for new learning opportunities online, new ways to gain practical experience, new ways to kind of bridge that gap from the skills they have now into building it to work readiness. And so we're seeing a lot of demand on that side. And so from a planning and strategy perspective, it's more about shifting our focus to one side of the marketplace where we know, we can add value and there is a demand there. And then once we're able to kind of grow that side, then when the market picks back up with hiring, then I think we'll be in a really good position to kind of build up that other side of the market when it's ready.
Right. And so in terms of shifting, to the one side of the market, have you had to make changes to your software or the frameworks that you've been using in terms of talent and training? Like, does your product itself look different today?
So our product doesn't look different in terms of what the main thing that changed was that because we had such a large amount of demand, we just didn't have capacity. And so we were kind of capped at the number of people we were able to work with, and which is one of the reasons why we decided to continue on hiring and adding that extra developer on our team so that we can handle the capacity that we saw.
Gotcha. And now, last time we spoke in your initial LaunchPod interview, we talked a lot about the value that Hatchways can provide for people looking to switch careers or just get into tech. Now, in terms of, the demand you're seeing or just what you're observing over the last couple of weeks, do you think that you're still as encouraging of career switchers, or are you trying to focus more on helping people who already have a certain skill set and place them? Like, do you kind of think that the hiring and talent environment is looking different and, you're adding value in a different way?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the demographic hasn't changed too much over the last few weeks, in the sense that we do focus a lot on career shifters, but oftentimes it's career shifters who have a certain level of skills and knowledge coming in. And so we're not teaching people skills from scratch. Oftentimes they're learning either completely on their own with online resources, or completing like continued education with another institute and then coming in through our program. I think the biggest value that the candidates come in and get is like, we really simulate what it's like to work in a startup environment with modern technologies. And so even if you learned the skills online, or even if you learned it through a boot camp, you're not getting that experience of working in an agile development with a team, with an engineering manager to give you feedback and make you improve as a developer. And that's what they're getting from this experience. We run these sort of simulated work environments for them to improve not only their technical skills, but really like their job skills. And so that still hasn't changed in the sense of like the type of value they're getting from it. We are just more reassessing how to widen the net of people that we work with, because before we were not focused on students in programs because they couldn't dedicate the amount of hours we would require for them to succeed with the program. But given the change in landscape, that's something that now we're reconsidering, given the amount of people who have free time now due to the changes in their curriculum.
That's awesome. And then, when we start to achieve some normalcy again, and then, there's more demand on the employer side, like, are you optimistic in terms of what Hatchways will look like at that point? And just your general, I'd say, outlook for what the business or like the economy is actually going to look like in the context of Hatchways when we come out on the other side of this. Like, you sound fairly optimistic when you're speaking right now. So I'm just curious if you can elaborate on that.
I mean, I think I'm very optimistic, and I think that there are two reasons why. I think given the circumstances that we're in right now, everyone has to move online. And so businesses that haven't been in the forefront of that and who haven't built the infrastructure needed to be able to move online are now going to realize that that is a focal point that they're going to need to do. And that would obviously mean that they need to bring more technology in-house and hire people. And so I think that this circumstances kind of highlights, the needs of businesses and where they need to move towards. And so the need for technical talent is only going to increase. I think secondly, once the market changes back into a hiring mode, employers are going to be like overwhelmed and inundated with developers coming in, interviewing, and like wanting to work for them. And so solutions that can streamline that process and sort of filter through and find the best talent is also going to be a need for employers. And so I think we are well positioned to help them with that as well.
For sure. And I know, again, I keep referencing our previous episode because we went pretty deep on your value that you add in terms of assessing talent and hiring. And I mean, all of that, to your point, is still going to be so valuable, and even more so on the other side, especially if employers have this influx. Can you, just for people listening, speak briefly to the value that you bring to employers in terms of hiring and assessing talent?
Yeah, so kind of an overview. What Hatchways does is we help tech companies hire what we call Moneyball tech talent, which is highly talented but overlooked software developers. And we do this by evaluating candidates on their practical skills rather than their resumes and interview skills. And through this process, we're able to empower hidden talent and launch their careers into tech.
Very cool. And something that we'll definitely need on the other side of this. I don't know if you've seen it too. There is a large document going around across the tech community in Toronto of all the folks looking for jobs right now, right? Because just given where we are, whether it's a temporary layoff or a permanent one, there's definitely an influx of very, very talented people. So I don't think that when we come out on the other side of this, employers won't have a hard time finding people, and we're doing as much as we can to surface that list of folks. I'll share it with you, Jaclyn, if you haven't seen it yet, just more as an FYI. And in terms of your optimism, like, how much of this has to do with you and your relationship with your co-founder Shams? Because you two have been through a lot together in terms of building one business, selling that business, working within Kick together after they acquired your first business, and now launching Hatchways. And, just for people listening in, like, I can't say enough great things about the two of you. And it was just such a pleasure to kind of get to know Shums a bit more, because you and I had already met in real life several times up to then. And he just seems like such a wonderful human, and the two of you really balance each other out. So, when you look at the pandemic and the crisis and some of the challenges, and yes, you are optimistic, like, do you guys kind of just look at this as like, okay, this is just another thing that we're going to get through together? How have you supported each other through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a big source of optimism for us is how can we come up with creative solutions to the problems that we're facing right now. And I think that because we tackle problems like sort of in a very different ways, we're able to kind of put two and two together and come up with very interesting like solutions. And so one such example would be, as mentioned, obviously there's a slowdown in hiring, and we have a bunch of candidates that have been pre-qualified by us and are really talented developers, but just given the economy, there's not a lot of opportunities for them right now. And so when we think about how can we best set them up so that in a few months, when the economy picks back up, they'll really stand out amongst the rest of the candidates that are applying, and a really creative solution that the two of us came up to together was, can we help these candidates build out and kind of own projects that help with COVID-19. And
I love that.
Like, they're using their technical skills, they're building their skills, but they're also contributing to a cause that kind of put them in the situation that they're in. And that's really been such a motivating thing for us to see, because a lot of the candidates that we work with are kind of, feeling pessimistic, feeling down about the lack of opportunities, but to give them another extra sense of purpose to work on these causes while building their skills has been a really amazing way for us to personally feel more inspired and motivated as well.
It's so fantastic. If you can share after the fact, or just kind of stay in touch with us on some of those creative solutions that people are coming up with, we'd love to include those in some of our blog posts. We've been trying to tell stories of how some of our alumni are helping to fight against COVID-19 in very creative ways, and I think that sounds like a perfect example. So would you say, are you and Shums, just in terms of, obviously day-to-day ops, it's fast and the pace of change is fast. So do you have kind of a process or framework that you're using to harness that creativity? Like, are the two of you connecting with your team daily, weekly, in terms of just saying like, okay, white space, what do some of these new opportunities look like?
Yeah. So in terms of like meetings and the frequency, that hasn't changed too much, in the sense that prior to all of this, we were still meeting on a daily basis. In the morning, we do daily stand-ups. On Mondays, we do sprint planning. And then on Fridays, Shums and I do a 2-hour product planning meeting. We did do a chunk of time last week with the whole team to just brainstorm different solutions that we have for the candidates that are facing a difficult time. So we did that as a team as well, and that came up with a lot of great ideas from the people in our team. So yeah, I think that we've been in constant communication, and hopefully we've built an environment where everyone on our team feels comfortable just sharing ideas they have. And yeah, so I think that's kind of bringing the optimism for me, at least.
Great. Yeah. And I'm sure just, with a small and nimble, and also, it sounds like you're all quite passionate about what you do and purpose driven, that I imagine it's fairly speedy in terms of executing on some of these creative ideas, right?
Yeah, very much.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think that's a great note to end on. I think something that everyone is struggling with right now is, when you're making choices that breakneck speed and everything looks so different every day, how do you find time to be creative? And it's something, I can personally attest to, that is a challenge, but I think that if you can keep it top of mind, there's plenty of opportunities to be had. And again, I don't doubt that a lot of the optimism and the continued success is because of your and Shums' relationship. And I encourage everyone to take a listen to the full Hatchways episode when we release it, just so you can get to know Shums a bit and hear a bit about Jaclyn and Shums' different skill sets and how you really complement each other. And personally, I look forward to coming to visit you when you're back in your co-working space, whenever that may be. And yeah, again, I'm just really appreciative of you taking the time, and I wish you both the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And of course, anytime, any way we can help.
Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back with more stories and resources in the coming weeks, so please tune in or share with a friend. At Next, we're really optimistic about the massive impact entrepreneurs will have on our future economy and our ability to enable their continued success by the actions we take now. With LaunchPod, we'll play a small part in supporting entrepreneurs today and every day. Thank you.